Eric.
if I remember correctly, but I
He
don't
is
think
from
about it.
Iowa.
I don't think he's
And his dad is in Newton, I finally got that straight. His dad lives in Newton, Iowa, finally, after all this work to get that straight. Oh, man. Finally, Jimmy's his name.
What's
Jimmy's his name. Or Jimmy his name. Jimmy's his name. Jimmy's his name. That's what you wrote down. Jimmy's his name. I heard him call. That guy's name is I was trying to write down the name of classes we had taken. I know I took ancient cultures and I took Daniel, we took Romans, and we took the geography class. What else did we take? You took some teaching classes.
Yeah, I took teaching, I took Daniel.
Daniel took Daniel.
Great doctrines or something like that.
Oh, we did do that one, you're right. Yeah, you're right, I was in that class. So that doctor, you're right, I talked about that one. Doctrines. What was in that class? Bible doctrines, we called that. Yeah, we did do that one. Like you're moving the houses.
I've been coming since fall of 2010 when Melissa.
I think I came on came this spring on
Yeah, you didn't come that, you didn't come that fall. I think we've been pretty much coming together since.
and then you must have you went to that teaching class. I came to ancient cultures in 09. That was the first one too. And you went something in the fall.
Yeah, that's teaching. It's like Bible class teaching or something.
Then did we start, the spring of 10, did we start coming together? Spring 10, fall.
It's kind of hard to believe because I can't remember that class.
Well,
I couldn't tell you what they
Well, I
were.
must have came in 10 and not 9, but I think I came the first.
No, you can't, well, you may have came, I came fall of 10, so it may have been spring of 10. You came, and then I came in the fall of 10.
Did we do something together? We didn't do one with Jerry Martin, did we?
Oh, no, but he was gonna,
We skipped a semester,
yeah, we skipped when Jerry had it.
cause he did some counseling thing or something.
Yeah, he did, yeah, so no, we skipped one. And then maybe that Bible doctrine class and Daniel, but I mean, there's too many years in there, right? It's gotta be,
We had to do something else. So I think that one semester I missed. Jerry did it.
for the semester I went that teaching class.
Yeah, I didn't do one then.
Let's say, since the fall, okay, that would be the fall of 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, we got some years going, haven't we?
I mean, that's like 7 classes, and I can remember about 3 or 4.
Yeah, so I was thinking people classes.
I can't remember
Daniel was like last fall.
It was in the spring.
Okay, Daniel was not the spring, we just got through with the spring before that.
Yeah, spring of third.
What did we do the spring before, what did we do in the spring? We did geography in the spring.
Daniel was spring 2013. Okay, that's for sure.
But we're in 2014.
Right. Okay, 2014.
We just finished Romans. We did Romans in the spring of 14. Spring of 14 we did Romans.
Okay, spring. Okay, then fall.
Fall of
2013.
we
fall.
did geography. Bible geography. Okay.
And then spring.
And I think in that spring maybe is when we did it Bible doctrines.
Spring 2014 would have been. You saying that was geography? No, that was
Daniel.
Romans.
2014
Romans.
Romans.
Evidences.
What's now?
Fall. Okay, I'm just putting it together.
Okay.
Okay, there's 4. Okay, doctrines for sure. Teachings. Okay, so 2012 and 2012, 2011, and 2011, 2010. Fall of 2010 would have been teaching.
Do you think that was when it was?
Okay, then this would have been Jerry. Okay, so we've got 3 slots left, and one of them was Bible doctrines.
When would it? The Bible doctrines, I think, was before Daniel.
Okay, I'll put this over here, doctrines. Okay, and then we had, seems like they didn't have textual classes. I remember being discouraged that they didn't, that we were, because I love, I think before Daniel, I don't think we had
Before Daniel Romans.
before Daniel, I don't think we really had
Well, maybe that's all we've done together. 1, 2, 3, 4.
no, 5, including this one. Doctrine, standard, geography, not Romans, evidences.
But we don't know what we did in 2012 and 2011.
Maybe we skipped it. Maybe someone didn't like it. We just skipped it. I know we did at least one semester, skipped it.
I see I've been at daycare. This is 14, 13, 12. I started farm 12. So maybe I didn't come to cultures until 11. Spring of, I did that cultures class in the spring.
That's why I did it.
I did it in the spring, that's all I know. I'll have to go upstairs. Out of the doctrine class.
And maybe they're doing something.
Did we
You know what? I think there's been more stuff I wasn't interested in, because I know they've had maybe there's just more stuff in there that I wasn't interested in. There's 3.
So we're thinking this is our 5th class? Not 5th class.
Our 5th class. This is our 5th class together for sure.
Either one of you all like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee?
Oh, no, thank you.
No thanks.
See, I think there's. I did bring on the power class. Did we take an intertesting one together? See, it seems like I did that. That was not the thing I told you.
supposed to get cool tonight.
It is, it's about 37, but it's windy, so I don't think it'll frost. Has there only been 2 of y'all here all day?
Is what now?
Only been 2 of y'all here all day?
3, Roger just went home.
Oh, okay, well,
He had some,
I'm feeling a little better now.
he had some discomfort. So
Did
he
he?
had to go home.
Did he have a heart attack?
No.
He did not have one?
Muscle spasms is what they're telling him now.
A heart muscle spasm?
No,
Just what the.
in the shoulder, the muscle that runs from your shoulder to your neck, up your neck.
Really?
There's a muscle in there. He's had surgery on the shoulder,
Oh.
so they think it's related to.
Wow, well, at least it wasn't a heart attack.
Right.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I didn't
It's
know.
a whole lot
either.
better news than a heart attack, isn't it?
It is, but I didn't know you could have a muscle spasm that would make you think you had a heart attack. That's interesting news.
Yeah, it's pretty scary there for a few minutes for him.
Okay, well, I'm glad there was 3 of you. I'm just starting to feel a little bad.
Yeah.
So Roger, what are they gonna do when nobody comes? They just gonna sit there and talk?
Plus some online
Well,
folks.
that was a lot of online folks. Roger and I've been sitting here trying to decide how many classes we've taken. I think this is my 6th,
You're 6.
but we're missing some stuff, so I don't, between the 2 of us, we can't decide what it is.
What is your last name?
Mock, like M-A-A-C-H.
M-A-A-C-H.
Mhm. So we've been thinking about this, about what classes we've taken them together at night for about 2-3 years. And I came a few times by myself, and I came once by myself in the daytime. That's where I was working. I guess our memories are too good anymore. Both of us can't think of it. Well, that's pretty bad.
I wish more folks would take advantage of it. It's a good program.
It's a very good program. Like I said, Roger and I have been coming over here since we found out about it. We've pretty much been over here. And I don't remember when I found out about it. That's kind of the problem, but we love
Are you
it.
taking the course for any type of credit?
No. No, I don't want to pay.
Just auditing.
Well, at first I didn't think they'd pay more, but I didn't think they'd give you anything. So when I first started coming, I thought, well, they ain't gonna do that anyway, so, and I thought, well, and then I thought about it again, and I'm like, I don't wanna run a paper. I know I took the classes, so that's all that matters. We've enjoyed them, we really, really have enjoyed them.
Yeah, I've enjoyed them
Like
too.
I said, I just don't understand why more people don't take advantage of it. I guess they go to church on Wednesday night and they think that's enough, I don't know. But I enjoy it, and once we can come over here, we will. I'm not nuts about coming at night, but
Yeah, it's a little late for me.
especially being that, the time has changed, I'm not as nutty about it, but I work during the daytime, so, well, I work at Mother's Day, I don't know if we call that working or not. I do the 2s, and I told Roger today, those kids were just as wild as could be. And then what you wanna know, we just went outside, and we got out of the car, and there's the full moon, so I'm thinking that might be the explanation for that. Some days I know I'm in the 2s room, and I think today's one of them. It's just the weirdest thing. It's just, that is so much of what you see monkey do age. It just amazes me every time I go over there.
Yeah.
Twice a week, I'm saying, I just don't get why that's true. They'll see one kid do it, and they'll see you get onto them, and they'll hear it, and the second one will just go to the exact same thing. It's just like, I don't get it. They're fun to work with, but I don't get them. A lot of people don't like teaching them like a Bible class because it's just too repetitive for most people. I kind of like the repetitive nature of it.
How you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. You've been in a lot of class. How many years you been coming over here?
What?
Like forever?
No, I started last January.
Oh, just in January?
Yeah.
What class was that in January? Me and Roger decided what class we took last January. Are you talking about January, this past January? When we took, what class was that?
We were doing Romans.
Romans, that's it, that's it. I thought I'd seen you here longer than that.
No.
But you're working for a certificate, right, or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Good luck on your paper, you still writing? You got it done yet?
No, you got yours?
I'm not doing one. I'm not getting any credit for it.
Oh, you just coming just to be coming?
I'm just coming to be coming. Let's just say I quit my college years, it was the end of the writing years. I'm not good at writing and I do not have no desire whatsoever to write paper. Hasn't crossed my head yet. And I don't think it's gonna cross my head to write a paper. Now Roger might, he might write a paper, I don't know. He's not taking it seriously.
Well, I'll let you write mine.
I know, you don't want me writing yours. I'm just not good at that sort of thing. Have you got yours done?
No.
Are you working on it?
No, not for this class.
Are you working on it yet?
I've not put anything to paper yet, no.
It's in your head, that's like my son says, here's what my son says. It's all up here, you know, I've gotta roll it around and then, you know,
Yeah, that's what I
the
do.
day before it's due, or the night before it's due, he's up at not recently, he pulled an all-nighter writing the paper, I said, that was dumb, why'd you do that? Oh, he said.
I got mine in my head and little bits and pieces comes from here. You know, I look over stuff and decide. So what I'm gonna do this Saturday is I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write it.
Put some of those ideas on paper.
Yeah.
They're due soon, right? I didn't bring my paper.
I kind of know how I'm gonna start it because I'm gonna start it with what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Oh, okay.
I think
That's
that's a good starting point.
Good to me. Good luck with that. Once you get all those ideas going, it'll flow.
See, Jimmy, you get prepared, try to come up with things, get you 30 minutes of light if you need it, don't sit there, turn over is easy. Always come prepared. Roger Chambers said he's gonna watch the
Yes,
Channel
sir.
online tonight.
Yeah, I talked to him earlier. Sure did. Sure did. Thank you.
And Brock said he wasn't gonna be able to make it.
Okay. Yeah, I heard you talking to him in the hall. I
Yeah.
figured that's what it was. Yes, sir. All right. Hey, Darren.
Turn it up.
I told it to mute.
What you got going there?
Okay, that didn't work. Let's do that. Now we should be good.
Let's do that.
All right, good to see everybody that's here and everybody that's there. We're all here, but we're not all there, as they say. All right. Hope everybody is well. Got Chantel and Don and Brother Douglas and Michael here and Wade Purder. And we have me as well, I guess. This semester has flown by. We are 5 meetings away from ending for this time.
Better hurry,
This
we don't
semester.
have much time left.
Sir?
We don't have much time
Oh,
left.
where is that?
East Tennessee, Saturday morning.
Oh wow, snow falling like crazy. I heard where Gatlinburg had just gotten a lot of snow.
I don't think my mom's going anywhere.
Yeah, now where does she live in East
East
Tennessee?
Tennessee, Newport.
Newport, okay, yeah, just
Probably been through there.
northeast, yeah, of Gatlinburg. All right, yeah, that'd be awesome, man. I wish that would happen in Mississippi. Even in the best of times, we don't get that in Mississippi. Wonder if Brother Douglas and Wade get any snow where they are. I think they're both in the north. So I think the answer would be an affirmative. All right. I mentioned we just have another month basically of this. I'm going to be in Schertz, Texas next week. Actually, I'm not going to be in Schertz, Texas when this class is going on. I'm going to be somewhere mid-Arkansas when this class is going on. I'm speaking on Wednesday and driving back on Thursday. So, Brother Hoff said, you guys don't get real snow. Snow up high, but not down here, Wade Purdom said. All right, so Wade doesn't have to worry about it too much. But yeah, I bet Brother Douglas gets a lot of snow. Hot all year round, Chantel said. She's in Singapore. So hot and probably very humid if I had to guess. Next week, Steve Ulrich, who is the fellow that handles all the electrical things, all the technical stuff, I should say, he is going to push play on a couple of videos on Charles Darwin. So we're not going to focus so much tonight on Charles Darwin. We're going to hustle through the last several fellows that we want to mention, just mainly for time's sake. And then we're going to begin talking about the flood tonight. We're going to have to skip over some things, such as refuting the Big Bang and evolution with and without the Bible. As far as with the Bible, we have on Overview of Christian Evidences number 1 a lot of the passages that answer those questions. Without the Bible, you can argue just how are those scientific. As far as the Big Bang is concerned, what banged? Where did that infinitesimally small dot of matter originate? It had to have come from somewhere. Couldn't have always existed according to the steady state theory. So where did that come from? It couldn't have created itself. It's not possible. It couldn't be here one day and say, you know what, I'm going to create myself tomorrow, because it wouldn't have been here to be able to create itself. So that matter had to come from somewhere. So we could spend some time. I think we've laid the groundwork to be able to answer both those questions. How do we argue against the Big Bang scientifically without the Bible? How do we argue against the theory of evolution without the Bible? And we've laid the foundation for that. Something that has no scientific evidence, you're not going to be able to prove, which means that you can argue against it because it doesn't have that evidence. In spite of what that biology book said last week, you remember that it said, oh, we've got many Northwest Pennsylvania is where Brother Hoff is. Now, we have many fossils in this, intermediate zone. Okay, but we're not going to show you any pictures of any. Makes me wonder if you really have any. So we won't focus upon that. We will turn our attention immediately after we finish naming these last few scientists that we want to deal with this evening. We will turn our attention to the flood. And then hopefully the next Thursday night, which will be the 13th, hopefully on that Thursday night we can finish talking about the Genesis flood and at least talk about maybe Mount St. Helens for a while on that Thursday night. That's going to be the plan. 60 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. I've seen pictures of Pittsburgh snowed over, and if you're 60 miles north of Pittsburgh, I can only imagine. All right. Let's put our little pretty pictures on the big screen. There we go. Good. Okay, when we left last week, we had finished talking about Matthew Maury. We won't go, as I mentioned, into any detail right now as far as Charles Darwin is concerned. If you happen to either have this book or have hunted up this book, Charles Darwin really begins that chapter 5, page 103. Charles Darwin, the man whose time had come. I remember hearing of the Jamestown flood. Yeah.
David McCullough's book was awesome.
All right. Charles Darwin, beginning on page 103. Let me go ahead and give you his dates. The dates for Charles Darwin are 1809 to 1882. Charles Darwin. All right, let's move forward, since there'll be a couple of videos regarding Darwin, to Sir Henry Rawlinson. Sir Henry Rawlinson, not a scientist, but an archaeologist. I believe that you could treat archaeology as a science to some degree, and so that's why we bring him up here. Sir Henry Rawlinson. Let me read what Morris said here about Rawlinson. Sir Henry Rawlinson was one of the greatest archaeologists, as well as a devoted Christian. And we would use the term, of course, in parentheses, and Bible student. Originally an English military man stationed in India, he is best known for his remarkable feat of exposing and deciphering the Behistun inscriptions of the Persian Emperor Darius, written on the face of a great scarp in 3 ancient languages, Old Persian, Assyrian, and Elamitic. This accomplishment opened the way to a real understanding of the ancient history of the Near and Middle East. What did Rawlinson do? Well, that doesn't go into a whole lot of detail. Rawlinson found what is called the Behistun inscription, as was mentioned there. Now, the Behistun inscription was, if I remember correctly, about 350 feet above a valley. In fact, I have some pictures of it. It's not the end, by the way. Here is a picture from the ground. I'll pop this up for those that are at home to be able to see this. Okay, the Behiston inscription. This is the mountain. If you look way up here, you can see the inscription. You can't tell too much from this, but these are little lines just in columns. 3 different forms of language, as Morris mentioned. Now, right here you see images. And a bunch of smaller images to the right of the 3 big images to the left. We'll zoom in there. And these are the images. 3 images to the left here. A lot of smaller images. You have the roaming gnome down there on the far right. Looks like the roaming gnome. He was actually added later. You can tell by that extra indention in the rock there where they had to cut him out. This is in what we call bas relief, which means that the images stick out from the background. Bas relief. This is Darius Hystaspes, or Darius the Great. All right, so Rawlinson is the one that first decided, hey, I'm going to try to study that, figure out what it says. And he actually climbed up. You'll see that this is a pretty rough area. When Darius had this carved, he had 100 feet below, basically scraped off, so it was relatively inaccessible. Rawlinson sort of braved his life, so to speak, to be able to climb up and get rubbings of it and take it back and try to interpret what it says. This is what the actual text looks like. All those lines that look so small, each line about 2, maybe 2.5 inches tall. What type of language is that? Well, obviously, as was mentioned, Old Persian, Assyrian, and Elamitic, but all 3 languages were forms of cuneiform, or wedge-shaped writing. The value of Rawlinson was his respecting God and His Word, and his understanding that Darius is somebody that's pretty important scripture-wise, and so he pursued this from that standpoint. But also, what he did in comparing these languages was he figured out cuneiform, how to translate cuneiform. Really, the Behiston inscription had the same type of importance for the Old Testament as far as in Mesopotamia as the Rosetta Stone had for Egyptian studies in Egypt. You remember that Champollion looked at the Rosetta Stone and saw 3 different types of writing, hieroglyphics, what's called Egyptian Demotic, which would have been like the common Egyptian of the day, and then Greek. And this comparison of the Egyptian Demotic and the Greek helped to decipher the hieroglyphics. Well, these cuneiforms that were really figured out by Rawlinson there are the basis for our understanding of the Cyrus cylinder, our understanding of the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser, our understanding of the Code of Hammurabi, our understanding of any number of texts. So he's important from that standpoint, and we're going to lump him in with these other scientists. We're going to do that because Morris did, and I think it's worthy of our note as well. Okay.
So the languages that were on that were,
They were Old Persian, Assyrian, and Elamitic or Elamite.
Old Persian,
Old Persian, Assyrian, and Elamite. I think there are three better names for those, but I don't remember right off what they were. But that's the broad term.
Where is it still located?
In what was Medo-Persia?
Okay.
West, fair amount of the southwest of the Zagros Mountains, east of Nineveh, northwest of Susa,
So Iraq.
Iraq. Yeah, modern day Iraq. Okay. So, Sir Henry Rawlinson. Now, let's turn our attention to Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1903. Herbert Spencer. Brother Thompson wrote about him on page 64. Obviously, Charles Darwin has already come along by this time. He's 11 when Spencer is born. But the paragraph above Spencer here says the road leading Charles Darwin in the modern day acceptance of the theory of evolution is a long, those at home, I'm trying to get that pulled up for you, is a long winding one as one traces the road of evolution, evolutionary thought through the annals of history. Some of the men who have traveled that road stand out more conspicuously than others. It becomes abundantly clear that some men have effected a profound influence in regard to evolution, not only on the men of their day, but even on those obviously who live in the 20th century. Such a man was Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1903, the Englishman. Spencer and the geologist Charles Lyell. Okay, we talk about Charles Lyell. Yes, we did last week. We talked about Charles Lyell. Probably influenced Charles Darwin more than any other two men of the Darwinian era. May ultimately be responsible for more of the acceptance of the theory of evolution than they are given credit for. Lyell has already been discussed. It is now Herbert Spencer who deserves our attention. Herbert Spencer, perhaps oddly it might seem, was not a scientist as such, but a philosopher. He too had been grappling with, quote unquote, the problem of the origin of species. Like Darwin, upon whom he was to have the most profound influence in later years, Spencer lived in ill health most of his life. Yet, whereas Darwin had inherited enough money from his parents to live comfortably, Spencer was very poor. He worked for 10 years as a railroad engineer and then as a journalist. When he was 40 years old, he set out to write a great work of philosophy in 10 volumes to gather knowledge and explain the principles of all the fields of knowledge. Spencer gave himself 20 years to accomplish this task. It actually took him 36 years. The writings of Herbert Spencer, formerly so influential, now line the back shelves of secondhand bookstores. A little spelling error there. Yet the chief books of Darwin are forever being republished and are so much read that their author's name is virtually a synonym among ordinary folk for evolution and among sophisticates for natural selection. In his own day, which was that of Darwin too, Spencer was regarded as a giant, and his Principles of Biology was adduced as one of the chief evidences for his high estimation. Okay, that's from Plotchman, Darwin, or Spencer. It cannot be doubted that Spencer had a profound influence on his generation, a fact indicated by, among other things, the tremendous number of books which were circulated by his publisher in the United States alone. May be added here that from the beginning until December 31st, 1903, the Messrs. Appleton had sold 368,755 volumes of Mr. Spencer's writings. Okay, that is over 1/3 of 1,000,000 volumes that he sold. These figures, of course, take no account of the sale of unauthorized editions during the years previous to the adoption of international copyright. So they're not telling how many copies really were sold. As Doctors Bells and Clark point out, publishers cannot continue publishing all authors' books in such quantities unless there is a big demand for them. And when people buy books, it is quite likely that they read at least some of them. This gives one idea of how tremendous was the influence of Spencer in the latter part of the 19th century. How many of you have actually heard of Herbert Spencer? Maybe, just in passing, but to know much about him? Probably not. How many of us have heard of Charles Darwin?
Yeah.
Everybody. Herbert Spencer, Chantel said, in reference to Darwin. That's right. That's all you hear, gentlemen. Herbert Spencer was a confirmed naturalist, and we've seen that term with reference to Charles Darwin. And that may be stating the matter too simply. Even from his younger years, he leaned heavily toward totally naturalistic explanations for everything he saw. In fact, the conviction that everything must be explained naturally became so strong with Spencer that his own father claimed that his son regarded natural laws in the same way others regarded religion. Okay, nature up here, natural law, religion up here. For some, religion; for him, natural law. His father said, "From what I see of my son's mind, it appears to me that the laws of nature are to him what revealed religion is to us, and that any willful infraction of those laws is to him as much a sin as to us disbelief in what is revealed." Spencer's bias against the supernatural was so compelling that he could not even think about supernatural manifestations being possible. He wrote, "Any simple induction would, I think, almost have led me to believe in supernatural agency, were it not that with me the conviction of natural causation is so strong that it is impossible to think away from it. If I find myself obliged to hold that there are supernatural manifestations and a supernatural interference with the order of things, then my conclusion that the power underlying things is diabolical." Because of his natural attitude, he was led, like Darwin and Huxley, to accept evolution. Okay, he accepted evolution. He had rejected special creation and was looking for something to take its place. Let's go down a little bit further. Spencer's admission of his strong bias. Statement for Spencer's own pen proves the above statement to be correct. 4 years before Darwin's Origin of Species, he made this comment. Yes, sir.
So he kind of thought everything was bad. He had a hard time finding good in the world, and that kind of led him to...
Sounds like, he didn't have any reason to believe there was something higher, effectively. Let's go down here. This anti-supernatural bias was built up before Spencer accepted the theory of evolution. In fact, this bias prepared the soil for the seed of evolution. For time's sake, let's go a little bit ahead because we want to hit one thing right here. All right, this is what we want to focus on. We've established that he was an evolutionist, but look at this. Thus, during the period between 18 and 20 years of age, Spencer was building up a frame of mind that made ridiculous the idea of creation, and which necessitated some sort of hypothesis of evolution to explain the origin and development of life without a break in the chain of physical causation, thus without supernatural intervention. Spencer, on occasion, referred to a first cause, yet he was agnostic by his own admission. All right, this is what's important for us. He was an evolutionist, but he recognized that there had to have been a first cause. There had to have been a first cause. All right, so that's important to us. He's agnostic, he's evolutionist, but he recognized there had to be a cause. He was agnostic by his own admission. Not only was he agnostic, but he even tried to avoid thinking about God. Seems to me that our best course is to submit to the limitations imposed by the nature of our minds and to live as contentedly as we may in ignorance of that which lies behind things as we know them. My own feelings respecting the ultimate mystery is such that of late years I cannot even try to think of infinite space without some feeling of terror, so that I habitually shun the thought. I don't want to think about the future if there's a God, so I'm going to ignore the future. How many people are like the fool in Psalm 14:1 that say in their hearts there is no God? He's saying there is no God because what did he not want? He didn't want a God. If I say there is no God, my conscience is salved. I don't have to worry about God. That's the state of many in our world today who deep inside know that there's something higher, but don't want to admit it. Notice he said, it seems to me our best course is to submit to the limitations imposed by the nature of our minds and to live as contentedly as we may in ignorance. What's the old expression? Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss. Why? Because if I'm ignorant of something, I'm not responsible. Not responsible. But you know what? Being ignorant of something doesn't relieve responsibility. So, that's why he's important. He was an agnostic. He was an evolutionist, pre-Darwin. But he knew there had to be a first cause. And you'll notice first cause there is capitalized. He did not want to think about that.
That which lies behind things, which, that quote was, that which lies behind things which, as we know them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Now look at this a little bit more here. It's to Herbert Spencer that credit is usually given for the phrase survival of the fittest. So Herbert Spencer, survival of the fittest.
Good point.
All right, it seems that Darwin likewise borrowed this term from Spencer and popularized it. Okay, that's Spencer. Hebrews 11:27, Don Gary puts here, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured to see in him who is invisible. Thomas Gray is well known for his phrase, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. The phrase from Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton College is possibly one of the most misconstrued phrases in English literature, Douglas Hoff said. All right, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Didn't know the origin of that. I appreciate that, Brother Hoff.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to Alfred Russel Wallace. Since we're already on the screen, I will leave it there and I'll just turn to the appropriate page. Right now I'm on 71. I need to go to 81. Who is Alfred Russel Wallace? All right, let me give you his dates here. 1823 through 1913. 1823 through 1913. Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace is going to be associated with natural selection. Natural selection. We've already seen that term. We've seen those that had this natural selection thought even before, but he's the one that really names it and builds upon what had been a thought, so to speak. Who is Alfred Russel Wallace? What is his contribution to evolutionary history? What is the meaning of Eiseley's above-mentioned statement, which, let's see, that statement, in this centennial year of 1959, 100 years since the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, innumerable addresses will extol the scientific achievements of Darwin. Wallace, on the other hand, will be present in many of these historical accounts only as an attenuated shadow, a foil to the great Darwin. Many will not know his name, or if they recognize it, will do so only with vague expression that Wallace found out something which Darwin had already perceived more clearly, when in reality that's not necessarily the case. Alfred Russel Wallace was born January 8, 1823 in the Welsh village of Usk in Monmouthshire. His father seems to have been a middle-class gentleman who had, through a series of misfortunes, lost all of a small but comfortable inheritance. As a result, the Wallace family had sought refuge in the remote district of Monmouthshire, where low rent and country food were available. Wallace's father appears to have had a good education and was fond of books, which he read to the family on many occasions. Alfred Russel Wallace left home before he was 14 and saw little of his family after that. His schooling, what little there was of it, was from a small grammar school in the old town of Hereford. All right, Hereford. Wallace traveled to London, where he lived with his older brother John. He was waiting for another brother, William, from whom he was to learn surveying. While learning surveying, he also learned much geology. He once remarked, "We obtain an excellent illustration of how nature works in molding the earth's surface by a process so slow as to be almost imperceptible." If you look today, the scientists, the evolutionists would say, if you look today at the Colorado River, and then you look at the Colorado River tomorrow, would you see any difference? No. If you look at the Colorado River a year from now, would you see any difference? No. But if you look at the Colorado River 100,000 years ago and today, what do you see? The Grand Canyon. So his idea of geology was that these changes could happen so slowly as to be almost imperceptible. Okay, that's the uniformitarian idea that we've already seen a number of times. And that's how nature works. Who's doing the working? Nature is. In 1843, Wallace's father passed away, and his brother William, because work was scarce, had to tell Alfred Russel that he would have to move out on his own. So once again, Wallace moved to London. In 1844, he secured a teaching position at a school in Leicester. He remained at that post somewhat over a year. It was while he was at Leicester that Wallace read Alexander von Humboldt's Personal Travels in South America, and we've seen this name before, Thomas Malthus. We talked about him a couple or 3 weeks ago. Thomas Malthus, an essay on the principle of population. Both of these writings were to profoundly influence young Wallace. Warren Eiseley summarizes well the situation when he says, "It can already be seen," and again a typo there, "that although they were separated by a vast social distance, Darwin and Wallace had pretty much the same reading background, except that Wallace had a greater concern for social movements and perhaps a deeper and more intense interest in the study of man. Both had been stimulated by their predecessors, Lyell and Humboldt, and for that matter Malthus. Darwin had already made his voyage and was working secretively at Down, while Wallace, 14 years younger, was still teaching children to read. No one could possibly have imagined that this unpromising, unlettered young school teacher would catch up to and share honors with the greatest biologist of the age, but it was to be. Wallace was not only influenced by Lyell and Malthus, but by two other writers as well. Robert Chambers' work, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation, and William Henry Edwards' work, A Voyage Up the River Amazon, profoundly influenced Wallace. So notice this title here, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. Now creation is there, but vestiges of natural history sort of remind us of the uniformitarian slogan, no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. Well, there's no vestige of a beginning, but there is vestige or view of the past. But he is a uniformitarian. No vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. You may remember that quote from James Hutton. So these two works influenced Wallace. While at Leicester, Wallace met Henry Walter Bates, an entomologist. What's an entomologist?
Study the embryos. No, the
No.
words. The
No, that's an etymologist.
etymologist.
Insects.
Insects. Very good. He studied insects, an entomologist. The two became fast friends, and after reading Edwards' work and after talking personally with Edwards in London, Wallace and Bates decided to make a trip to Brazil. They departed England in April of 1848 on board the ship Mischief, an appropriately named ship. All right, Brother Chambers, good to have you here. Brother Chambers is doing much better than he was last week at this time. Turned out it wasn't his heart, wasn't a stroke or anything. He was having some muscle tightening and whatnot. I forget the exact explanation, but great to have Brother Chambers with us. He was here in person earlier today. Now he is online. Okay. Wallace was to spend the next 4 years of his life in the Amazon, working there as a naturalist. Because his health failed him, however, he returned home after those 4 years, while Bates stayed 7 more years. As a result of Bates' travels, he produced the English classic The Naturalist on the River Amazon. Wallace arrived back in England in 1852, but because of a fire on board the boat, he lost almost everything he had worked so hard for during those years in the Amazon. He sought refuge with a married sister and worked for 18 months on his account of his travels. However, his stay back in England was short-lived. In 1854, he sailed for Malaya, where he was to remain for the next several years. Isley says, although Wallace appears to have been a believer in the general principle of evolution since the time of the vestiges that we noticed earlier, it was here in Malaya, amidst fever and the long indoor rainy system, that Wallace began to marshal the thoughts that would place him beside Darwin. Wallace was tremendously interested in plant and animal distribution. He studied William Swainson and Humboldt. He now had experience in both the New World and the Old World tropics. The questions about the origin of species, he tells us, was rarely absent from my thoughts. Traveler though he was, he carried books with him. The great works of Lyell. Okay, we've studied Lyell. The great works of Lyell, he remarks in his autobiography, had furnished me with the main features of the successions of species in time. While visiting Borneo in 1854 and 55, he prepared a paper on the law which has regulated the introduction of new species. He sent it to the Annals and Magazine of Natural History, where it was published in September of 1855. Every species, Wallace wrote as his principal conclusion, has come into existence coincident both in space and time with a pre-existing closely allied species. The young naturalist was disappointed when the article passed almost unnoticed. Undaunted, Wallace continued to work and write. In the early months of 1859, while he was suffering from his intermittent fever, he was finally able to formulate his viewpoint on the problem of the origin of species. Malthus' work, Thomas Malthus, which had influenced Darwin in such a strong way, became the basis for Wallace's ideas as well. Why did some animals live while others died? Now, Malthus is going to be asking that with reference to human populations. Why do some people live? Why do some locations thrive and others die? He felt the answer was clear: the best fitted live. Again, a little typo there. Now let's pause there just for a second. We mentioned when we were laying out the arguments for the existence of God, we mentioned the moral argument. And we mentioned that when Hitler was being tried, he obviously he was dead, but his Germany had to answer at the Nuremberg trials for violating a higher moral law. Now, if evolution is the case, and if you need survival of the fittest, the best fitted live, then what's wrong with the Germans exterminating the Jews and anybody else that was not of their higher race? Are they not merely doing what they can to survive and pass their Aryan genes on to the next generation? That's exactly what they're doing. What they are doing is in perfect harmony with evolution. But they were condemned for violating that higher moral law. The only way around that is to say they were unjustly condemned. And I have yet to hear an evolutionist say they were unjustly condemned. Anyway, back to the study. As Dr. Isley observed, it was Darwin's unpublished conception down to the last detail, independently duplicated by a man sitting in a hut at the world's end. They said the exact same thing, though they were on other sides of the planet. Doctors Bells and Clark corroborate Isley's observation. Alfred Russel Wallace came to the theory of natural selection or survival of the fittest independently of, but not before Darwin, so about the same time. Wallace rushed his quickly written paper to Darwin with these words upon his lips: "I hope that the idea would be as new to him as it was to me." Darwin received the paper in June of 1858 and was in great despair as to its contents. He even remarked to Lyell, "All my originality, whatever it may amount to, will be smashed. I never saw a more striking coincidence." Darwin was at a loss as to the course of action he should take. He sought his friend's advice, and as Isley notes, wiser counsels prevailed. Darwin fortunately had a copy of a letter sent to Asa Gray at Harvard College, Harvard College, which validated his priority, that is, his being first. After much self-questioning by Darwin and judicious consideration by Lyell and Hooker, it was decided to read Wallace's paper along with Darwin's letter to Gray and an extract from his unpublished sketch of 1844 before a meeting of the Linnaean Society on July 1st, 1858. This was the dramatic prelude to the great intellectual storm which would shake the latter half of the 19th century and be reflected in the Scopes trial of the 1920s here in the U.S. We'll talk about that later this month. Yet the beginning was deceptively quiet. Wallace was traveling among the islands, unaware of fame, lost in a dream of rare birds and rare butterflies. Darwin, who did not attend the meeting, was nursing a sick child. There was no discussion before the society. A man pursuing birds of paradise in a remote jungle did not yet know that he had forced the world's most reluctant author to disgorge his hoarded volume, or that the whole of Western thought was about to be swung into a new channel because a man in a fever had felt a moment of strange radiance. The path led on, it always did for Wallace. It was an odd turn of events. Darwin was sitting on his theory of evolution based on natural selection when Wallace wrote to him about his theory. Probably safe to say that the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species was greatly hastened because of that single letter from Wallace. When did Darwin publish Origin of Species?
After he got the letter.
Well, after he got the letter, but y'all remember the year?
I think 204 years ago would have been, I don't remember.
Yeah. 1859.
59, 205 years ago.
Yeah, now 205. 1859. When did he get the notice from Wallace? 1858.
He was born 200.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So he was rushed to publish. Yeah, Darwin Day last fall, I think it was. Or maybe earlier this year. Darwin Day. All right, let's see.
So, Brother Cates,
Yes, sir.
when you read in Darwin's Origin of Species,
Yes, sir.
is it a halfway interesting read? I've never even looked at it.
Yeah,
I mean, for what it's worth,
yeah,
somewhat
it,
hard read, probably.
it depends. Some of it's actually sort of interesting. Some of the general, just general things that he says are fairly interesting. I personally sort of like reading some of his things regarding the voyage of the Beagle, just because that's, you know, sort of like almost a gazetteer, if you will. I mean, Chantel's been on Mount Wellington in Hobart, Tasmania. Charles Darwin went to Mount Wellington in Hobart, Tasmania, and that's a pretty neat thing. In fact, if you go up to the observation area, they actually have something about Charles Darwin having climbed the mountain. Charles Darwin, if you read his account of climbing that, he said he absolutely hated Mount Wellington. I liked it. Of course, I didn't have to climb up it. I rode in a car. But it's neat, you know, seeing him talk about some of the places that you only read about in maybe textbooks in high school. So it's pretty neat. Remind me during a break, and I'll go grab it and let you thumb through it. It's not something I just want to sit down and read. To put it in perspective, you had to read the Genesis flood for Dad's class. I'd rather read the Genesis flood.
Okay.
So that puts it into perspective a little bit, because the Genesis flood isn't a great read just to sit down and to read, but it's interesting. It's interesting. He makes some interesting concessions in it, and a lot of it is telling you, hey, I'm not really sure about what this is leading to. But it's interesting. All right, let's go back to the screen here. Certainly the obvious question would be, why was it not Wallace's theory that gained popularity instead of Darwin's? You know, time-wise, about the same. There are perhaps several reasons. Wallace, as a man in station life, maybe justly stated his first reason. Remember, he didn't come from money. He didn't come from the background of having an Erasmus Darwin already presenting some of the ideas and being known for them. More pervading reason, Hall and Hall in their book The Truth, God or Evolution pointed out embarrassingly, Darwin found himself at opposite poles on the question of natural selection and struggle for existence with none other than the co-founder of modern evolutionary theory, Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace parted ways with his more famous colleague over the issue of natural selection. And so, their differences may have made Darwin a little bit more appealing. Isley says this is indeed the case. In terms of his later life, he can be classified as one of the more historically inclined, theistically inclined evolutionists. Wallace, though an evolutionist, retained a spiritualistic view of life and a type of theism. So he is he's not quite the skeptic or theological rebel that Darwin was. Finally, the man who had been impressed in his youth by organized religion was led to suggest that a higher intelligence might have played a hand in the development of our kind. But again, that's a pretty big might. Wallace asked, how then was an organ developed so far beyond the needs of its possessor? Natural selection could only have endowed the savage with a brain a little superior to that of an ape, whereas he actually possesses one but little inferior to that of the average member of our learned society. In other words, this is a little harder to explain than Darwin might make out. Wallace went further. Finally, Wallace challenged the whole Darwinian position on man by insisting that artistic, mathematical, and musical abilities could not be explained on the existence of natural selection and the struggle for existence, which we call that the aesthetic argument. Something else he contended, some unknown spiritual element must have been at work in the elaboration of the human brain. How do you evolve spirituality? Why else would men of simple cultures possess the basic intellectual powers which the Darwinists maintained could be elaborated only by competitive struggle? Darwin was stunned. Huxley was severely critical. Darwin, and we'll talk about Huxley in a minute. Darwin wrote to Wallace, "I differ grievously from you and I'm very sorry for it." Chambers' Encyclopedia says Wallace differed from Darwin on the problem of human evolution. In other words, there's a significant difference between human and animal. And Wallace indicated there had to be a supernatural explanation for it. For these reasons and others, Wallace became the unknown while Darwin rose to fame. Wallace would not compromise his beliefs, however much controversy or adverse comment they caused. He simply could not see in natural selection all that Darwin could, and so today we speak of Darwinism rather than Wallaceism. Such is history. All right, that's Wallace. Now let's move forward in our book here, about 40 pages or so. But in time, just a handful of years. I'm trying to change it on there. Wow. That's the problem with having two iPads in front of you. We're going to page 122 in Thompson. Hope y'all aren't motion sick.
Mm-hmm.
At least I'm not spinning it around. All right, let's talk about Huxley, the aforementioned Huxley. Thomas Henry Huxley, 1825 to 1894. (1825 to 1894). Darwin had two very dedicated disciples. One of them was Harvard's Dr. Asa Gray, who was mentioned 40 pages earlier, and the other was Thomas Huxley in England. Last of 7 children, Thomas Henry Huxley was born on May 4th, 1825 in Ealing, a small village on the outskirts of London. Huxley mentions in his autobiography, again another typo there, that he inherited from his mother his quick wit and his physical appearance. From his father, he says he inherited a hot temper and a tenacious attitude. Is the PDF of this book available online? No. Don, I had to chop it up and run a copy of it. Sorry about that. From his father, he says he inherited a hot temper and a tenacious attitude. If I had to ask you what animal epitomizes tenacious, what animal would you suggest?
Wolverine.
Wolverine, that would be a good one. In particular, a specific type of dog.
Bulldog.
A bulldog. Huxley is going to earn the nickname Darwin's bulldog. He says in his autobiography, I got that tenaciousness from my father. This is Darwin's bulldog. And I'm a fan of the Georgia Bulldogs, but not this bulldog. Okay, as a young man, he had a goal. I will leave my mark somewhere, and it shall be clear and distinct. THH, his mark, and free from the abominable blur of cant, humbug, and self-seeking which surrounds everything in this present world. Although Huxley himself would have become an engineer, his parents had different plans for his life. They sent him to medical school. Sometime in 1839, he had a similar experience to the one Charles Darwin had at medical school. Huxley attended a post-mortem examination. Upon seeing the human body cut open, the young Huxley became violently ill, had to be removed. He eventually made it through medical school, however, and was admitted as a fellow in the Royal Society in 1851 at the early age of 26. Now, by the way, remember that Royal Society had been started by creationists. We noticed it about 3 weeks ago. Like Darwin and the botanist Joseph Hooker, Huxley undertook a voyage on an English ship during his youth. He signed on the HMS Rattlesnake under Captain Owen Stanley as assistant ship's surgeon. The ship left England in 1846, 1 year after Huxley had graduated from medical school, traveled to Rio de Janeiro, crossed the South Pacific to the Cape of Good Hope, and moved on to Australia. While on this cruise, Huxley devoted most of his time to studies of coelenterates and mollusks. He was a fair artist and illustrated his notebooks with various sketches of plants, animals, and humans. His first scientific paper, written in 1845, prior to his trip, described a previously unknown layer in the human scalp, a membrane still known as Huxley's layer. Huxley returned to England in 1850 and began immediately to work on his memoirs. At first, he was unable to find a job, having tried universities in England, Scotland, and Canada, but to no avail. His family was poor and he had no other means of support. Darwin, on the other hand, had been left a comfortable inheritance. However, he eventually was able to find work, even invited to present papers at the Royal Institution. Through such elite connections, he made friends with the quote-unquote scientific elite of his day, men such as Spencer, Hooker, Lyell, and even Charles Darwin. Little did he know these would soon be his life's companions and fellow Darwinists. In 1859, okay, we saw the dates 1858 and 1859 a minute ago, when Darwin published Origin of Species, Huxley was astounded. Even though he had known of Darwin's work, he hadn't expected the kind of book Darwin had produced. Previously, Huxley had been hostile toward transformationism. With the publication of Origin of Species, he became a full-fledged supporter of it. What is transformationism? Well, it's changing forms, transforming evolution. Blinderman says Huxley was converted almost instantaneously, and like St. Paul, who had been similarly illuminated. Well, I don't know that that's the proper expression, but anyway, like St. Paul, he proceeded to convert the Gentiles. Dr. Henry M. Morris observes Thomas Huxley was probably more responsible than any other single individual for the rapid and widespread acceptance of Darwinian evolution. Through his constant and effective speaking and writing, Huxley was an evolutionist before Darwin, but the latter's book gave him the needed scientific support of it, or so he thought. He became known as Darwin's bulldog. That Huxley was an adamant supporter of Darwin is evident from his statements to Darwin. I trust you will not allow yourself to be in any way disgusted or annoyed by the considerable abuse and misrepresentation which, unless I greatly mistake, is in store for you. In other words, prepare to get attacked, but I hope that won't dissuade you. Depend on it, you have earned the lasting gratitude of all thoughtful men. And as to the curs which will bark and yelp, you must recollect that some of your friends, at any rate, are endowed with an amount of combativeness. Remember, he's tenacious. He's going to fight for Darwin, which, though you have often and justly rebuked it, may stand you in good stead. I'm sharpening up my claws and beak in readiness. Now, that's pretty funny that this bulldog had evolved claws and a beak. But anyway, I guess you can evolve anything given enough time. Little wonder he became known as Darwin's bulldog. Blinderman says Huxley was a pugnacious defender of heresy. His appetite for fighting was enormous, and while he modestly depreciated his controversial talent, he never resisted the temptation to enter into or to initiate one of those long controversies that make the annals of Victorian science exciting reading. Blinderman goes on to give the following account of Huxley's works in defense of Darwinism. But a hot temper alone is not sufficient for the popularizer of science. He must also have some acquaintance with the material he is to present to the public. Huxley was, with Charles Darwin, the foremost representative of biological science in England during the last century. Made a number of original discoveries. Remember, the Huxley layer. Promulgated the discoveries of others and instructed scores of student investigators such as Michael Foster, Fairfield Osborne, who disseminated throughout the world his method of laboratory training, and so forth. Beside the essential basic knowledge that he had at his command and his useful gladiatorial temperament, Huxley was also proficient in the art of persuasion, able to excite those who were left cold by brute facts. Sometimes it was as much to hear a stimulating lecturer who overpowered one with reason, facts presented in beautiful language, as to be educated in the subject that people came to listen to Huxley. In other words, those that want to hear a rant, if you will, they will flock to a Huxley. All right, for time's sake, let's move. Let's actually move back a couple of years. Let's move to Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur. Now, Pasteur is going to be on the better side. We've noticed Pasteur already. Wade Purdom suggested that maybe this is why people flock to Joel Osteen, and Chantel quickly pointed out he's not combative. All right, Louis Pasteur, you have his dates on the screen there. Louis Pasteur, 1822 to 1895. This fellow is a believer in God very strongly, very strongly. Let's notice what Morris says here. Not Morris. Let's notice what Thompson said here. He first introduces Pasteur back on page 93. Prior to and even including Pasteur's time. Let's see. Times were changing. 19th century marks the time not only of Darwin but of Louis Pasteur as well. It is Pasteur's work, at least a small portion of it, that we now look for in a historical interlude. For Pasteur's work was to have far-reaching effects even on the neo-Darwinian and synthetic theories of evolution. In other words, Pasteur really, to a degree, has more of a shelf life, pardon the pun, because of pasteurized, but he has more of a shelf life than Darwin, strictly speaking. All right, Louis Pasteur put spontaneous generation to rest once and for all, or so it would seem. All right, spontaneous generation. Let's go back in our minds to remember what spontaneous generation was. When we were looking at definitions earlier in the semester, we looked at the definition of abiogenesis. And that definition said something along the line, the now discredited idea. Discredited idea. That was on, in fact, I can bring that up very quickly. That was here, right where we left it. The now discredited theory, abiogenesis. That's according to Random House Dictionary. Who discredited it? That's what Louis Pasteur did. All right. Now, this discredited theory, abiogenesis. What abiogenesis says is that one day you have no life. And the next day, you have life. That is, you had a spontaneous generation. Life from non-life. Louis Pasteur proves that can't happen. The science books say Louis Pasteur proves that cannot happen. Evolution says that had to happen. Notice, evolution cannot take place unless there is life. But the atheist says there wasn't a God to create life. Where did life come from? It had to have been spontaneously generated. But that theory is now discredited. All right, that's why Thompson says here, it remained for Louis Pasteur to put spontaneous generation to rest once and for all, or at least so it would seem. The science book said, yeah, you don't have spontaneous generation, but evolution requires it. You know what? And a doctrine that requires a false doctrine as its foundation is itself going to be false, even if that's evolution. Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur was a chemist, one of the true benefactors of mankind. Bene meaning good, bene. Benefactors of mankind. Born in the little French town of Dole, he became interested in chemistry when he was studying at the Royal College of Bessingen. In 1847, he received his degree in physical science and was appointed assistant in the laboratory at the University of Paris. Later, as a result of his successful work with tartaric acid, he was made a professor of chemistry at Strasbourg. A few years later, he was made dean and professor of science at the University of Lille. His motto, it has been said, was Travailleur, travailleur toujours. Work, always work. Indeed, Pasteur was a very busy man, and apparently so were we, because we just went 10 minutes past our break. Let's take a break. We will be back in just a handful of minutes. I apologize for going longer. Everybody stretch your legs, and let me go grab Origin of Species.
Chantel says, kept me from my coffee. Unforgivable.
You going to Arkansas next time?
Yes. I see that now.
Yeah. Let's get back to South Texas. I need to come over here and watch TV. Video.
Right, and next week is the 13th, next Saturday is the 15th, yeah.
9 plus 6. Maybe we just do it. With Branson.
Remind me of where you are, Wade. North Idaho. Okay. All right. There it is. On the origin of the species. Right there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. North Idaho. How far from Canada? $30 miles. Wow. Are you close enough to say A? Although that may be more of an Eastern Canadian thing. I don't know. I don't know enough about Canada. We hear it sometimes when they come to visit down here. Okay. It's funny hearing northern Idaho called down here. Geography is so awesome. It's funny when people refer to Vancouver, Canada, Vancouver, BC, when they're talking about the Great Northwest. Talk about Portland and Seattle and Vancouver. When in reality, Vancouver is the Great Southwest, not the Great Northwest. Fun with geography.
Yes, we went to the easternmost point of the U.S.
Yes, sir.
in Maine, and you get there and you think, what's going to be the ocean? But there's a Canadian island just east of there.
I didn't realize that, but yeah, I guess, what is that, New Brunswick or something? Not New Brunswick.
Islands, I guess, Grand, Maine or something.
Okay, all
Uh,
right. How funny. Hey, we're in
Now, when he wrote The Descent of Man,
yes, sir.
what was that about? The descent.
That was, I don't remember completely, but that was building on his evolutionary thought, but I couldn't tell you anything more than that right off the top of my head. Let me go grab a sweet water and then we'll get started again.
Seems like that, seems like it's a digital camera.
Wow. I saw some things that I highlighted in
Yeah.
the table of contents. That's interesting. He would put that in there.
Yes, sir.
The absence of transitional forms.
Yeah. Yeah, the absence of transitional forms, and he goes into detail. We continually overrate the perfection of the geological record.
We continually what?
Overrate the perfection of the geological record. In other words, we think there's more there than there really is. And that's Darwin's admission. Let's see, Wade said, you would think it would be crazy cold here so far north, but it's actually not. Our immediate area even earned the name Banana Belt for its mild weather. Much colder, just 30 to 40 miles south. How interesting. Chantel's getting jealous hearing about the cold weather. Chantel, you mentioned that I interrupted your being able to get coffee. What time is it there? I assume it's morning?
I wondered it too.
Pardon?
I wondered it too.
Yeah. Yeah, 9 a.m. Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, appreciate your waking up early to study with us.
Where's she at?
She is in Singapore.
Singapore.
Yeah. And Wade is about 6:20. Because I think that's mountain time, if I remember correctly. All right. Louis Pasteur. Let's get back to Louis Pasteur. I'll get back to the screen here. There we go. In modern times, the most marked turn in thinking on the subject of the origin of life occurred as a result of Pasteur's celebrated experiments. His controversy was with his contemporary and countryman F.A. Pouchet. In fact, the controversy between Pouchet and Pasteur was reminiscent of that between Needham and Spallanzani. Like Spallanzani, Pasteur carried out meticulous experiments. Much of what Pasteur did was out of necessity as much as it was anything. The French wine industries were in serious financial trouble because of the continual souring of their products. The brewers of Lille, thinking spontaneous generation was the cause of their problem, sought out Pasteur's help in this problem. Little did they know that their request would be responsible for a major change in the direction of scientific thinking. Pasteur's experiments are explained in exact detail, complete with illustrations, in his now famous paper on the organized bodies which exist in the atmosphere. In other words, those bodies are already existing. They don't come into being in a sealed environment, if you will. They're already there. You can't see them yet. Examination of the doctrine of spontaneous generation. In summary of his tedious experiments, it may be stated that Pasteur proved that air contains microorganisms in non-uniform distribution. By heating air before passing it into sterile broth, Pasteur destroyed microorganisms which would otherwise have flourished. In order to answer the charge that the vital force had been destroyed by the heat, Pasteur refined the experiment to use swan neck or S-neck flasks. Okay, pictured below here. These allowed unheated air to enter, yet trapped the bacteria in the necks so that the broth, though open to the air, remained sterile. So pretty ingenious. As Dr. Thomas Brock has pointed out, we should marvel at the logic, the clarity, and above all the simplicity of these experiments. In a few decisive blows, Pasteur has ended, not ended temporarily, not staved off for a short while, ended the controversy concerning spontaneous generation. In other words, it doesn't happen. His experiments were easily reproducible, and this made it simple for others to accept his conclusions. It doesn't happen. So you have not the law of abiogenesis, but the law of biogenesis. Life comes only from life. In his triumphal lecture at the Sorbonne in 1864, Pasteur said, "Never will the doctrine of spontaneous generation recover from the mortal blow struck by this simple experiment." Never. The evolutionist has to have it happen. To this day, the evolutionist cannot demonstrate that it happens. There is the question of so-called spontaneous generation. Can matter organize itself? In other words, are there beings that can come into the world without parents, without ancestors? No. Today there is no circumstance known under which one could affirm that microscopial beings have come into the world without germs, without parents resembling themselves. Doctors Boardman, Kuntz, and Morris, in their book Science and Creation, remark, in 1864, over 200 years after Redi, Pasteur finally settled the argument. He showed that even the microbes, the last hope of the spontaneous generationists, also needed parents. Pasteur's experiments were brilliantly planned and executed and were accompanied by a devastating line of argumentation which was calculated not only to win the argument, but to vanquish the foe. When he got through, no one could doubt that the reason the broth in the sterile flask did not spoil was because bacteria from the outside could not get in. No new germs were able to generate themselves spontaneously inside the flasks, though both the broth and the air in the flasks were good. So thoroughly did he demolish the theory of spontaneous generation that it has been intellectually impossible for anyone to ever again champion Pouchet. Our school books have always told us that Pasteur's triumph over Pouchet, the advocate of spontaneous generation, was a great triumph for science and reason over superstition. You know what that superstition is the foundation of? Evolution. Evolution. It's easy to see why this work, published only a few years after Darwin's Origin of Species, would eventually influence all Darwinian and neo-Darwinian thought. For, as evolutionist G.A. Kirkett tells us in his book Implications of Evolution, in order for evolution to be true, spontaneous generation must have occurred. But it cannot.
So it's not true.
It's not true. It can't be true. Not without violating the law. Why is it called law? Because it's going to happen the same way every time. All right, that's Louis Pasteur. Let's turn to one more fella, and I don't remember if Thompson referred to him. I think he did, but let's. In fact, I'm 99% sure he did. But where 60, 61, 79, 121, 142, 143. Let's go to 142. And we don't have time to talk about Louis Agassiz, but let's go to Haeckel. In Europe, the leading proponent of Darwinian evolution besides Huxley was Ernst Haeckel. All right, Ernst Haeckel is going to be 1834 to 1919. (1834 to 1919). Now, Haeckel was German, as you'll see a little bit further down here. What's taking place 1919 Germany? World War I is coming to an end, which means Haeckel was at the end of his life when Germany was being humbled in World War I. During that period of humiliation, you had a German soldier named Adolf Hitler. Okay, let me double check the page number here, 142. Jot that down. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is going to, my memory's too short, 142. Adolf Hitler is going to love Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel is going to be the basis for, provide some of the basis at least, for Adolf Hitler's My Struggle, which is the translation of the name of his book, Mein Kampf. My Struggle. What is evolution built upon? Survival of the fittest. My Struggle. That's a book on his basis for having this pure race. It's evolution. The very foundation of Hitler's Germany is evolution. And the fellow that really spurred it was Ernst Haeckel. Very important. He was so anti-Christian and pro-evolution that Darwinians thought it might even hurt their cause. As it turned out, Haeckel's activities apparently diverted attacks from Darwin to Haeckel himself, thereby indirectly aiding Darwin's cause. Haeckel was a German anatomist. It is said that in his early life, Haeckel was a very religious person. However, in his later life, he was anything but that. Have you noticed some of the most anti-Christian people, Christian in a general sense, were in their younger days, quote-unquote, Christian? My worst, I think I've told y'all, my worst professor in university was a fellow who had been a Methodist or Presbyterian preacher. He was so anti-religion, anti-God. He's the one that called those that believed in God flat earthers and backwater scientists and so forth. Sometimes people can go to the opposite extreme. And Haeckel did. Haeckel is responsible for formulating the great biological law. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is his slogan. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. The great biogenetic law. Development of the individual repeats development of the race. General idea is that embryos in their development repeat the evolutionary history of their ancestors. Darwin had regarded embryonic recapitulation as a very strong evidence of evolution. He devoted 12 pages to embryology as a proof of this theory in Origin of Species. Chantel made the comment that one reason that people stream to go to that opposite extreme is because of hypocritical or ultra-conservative examples most of the time. And I agree 100% with that. How many people who are over the top, if you will, or are not what they claim to be, lead people further away from God than to. I mean, this professor that I had, he went to that opposite extreme. He freely admitted because he saw the hypocrisy and the division in the Christian world. Well, he had never been introduced to the church. And so blinded by that prejudice, he wouldn't respond. You're exactly right, Chantel. Embryology. Let me pop open the web browser here a second. If you go to the web here and you type in Haeckel's, let me throw an E in there. Haeckel's hoax. You will find what Haeckel is perhaps most famous for. And look, third link there, Apologetics Press. Haeckel's hoax, Haeckel's bogus embryo drawings. What Haeckel did was he took embryos of, I don't remember the exact animals, but like rabbit, cow, a couple of other things, and man. And he doctored the images so that all these would look the same in their earliest states. His in this particular image, his what he added to the images are in red. Look how much he altered these images so that it would look like his theory of embryonic recapitulation, embryonic repetition, was really scientific. Okay, those red spots. He made here are the animals: F fish, S salamander, T tortoise, C chick, H hog, C calf, R rabbit, M man. And he said, look how much different they look at this third stage, but how exactly similar they look at the first stage. In fact, in that first stage, look what tortoise, chick, hog, calf, rabbit, and man have. Gills, gill slits. They still have those in the second stage. They're gone by the third stage. But what does that prove? That proves that they have the same origin as fish. That's a flat lie. Now, that's a flat lie. You know what's really bad? It's still in our children's textbooks. Still in our children's textbooks. Yeah, I used a term combining this and this. Embryonic recapitulation is what his idea is called. Embryonic recapitulation. Still in our textbooks. Even though proven as a hoax for 100 years. Do you think our textbook publishers have an agenda?
Yes.
Indeed. Haeckel is now looked upon with disrepute. And this is where we're going to see what we just saw a picture of. Haeckel is now looked upon with disrepute as is his biogenetic law. As it turned out, the illustrations and drawing that Haeckel used to substantiate his biogenetic law, he was an accomplished artist, were nothing but lies and forgeries. As David Heiser points out, he even faked his drawings, which created a scandal in his day. Dr. W.R. Thompson, who wrote an introduction to the 6th edition of Origin of Species, said in that introduction, when the convergence of embryos was not satisfactory, Haeckel altered the illustrations to fit them to his theory. The alterations were slight, but significant. You know what? When you have to change the evidence, you don't have a case. And you'll notice that this admitting of Haeckel's hoax was in an introduction to Origin of the Species. Who's going to print Origin of the Species? An evolutionist. Even the evolutionist admits Haeckel falsified these things. Every scientist of Haeckel's day recognized the falsehoods. Professor L. Rudemeyer of the University of Basel and Professor Wilhelm Hiss, Sr. of the University of Leipzig, actually that's Leipzig, openly accused Haeckel of falsifying his drawings and backed up their accusations with facts. Today, Haeckel's embryonic recapitulation is not used by informed evolutionists as a proof of evolution. It has fallen on bad times as a result of Haeckel's frauds. As David Heiser observed, and there's that term embryonic recapitulation that we used a minute ago. As David Heiser observes, Ernst Haeckel is not considered as great a man now as he was. In his effort to prove evolution via embryology, he became overzealous and in the end did what the Darwinians were fearful all along that he would do. He brought the theory into disrepute. The theory and his proponents have not fully recovered to this very day. All right. Now I want to show you one more thing here. Let's go back to the web and let's click on, since Project Express came up there, let's see if we can find a particular picture which every one of us will find offensive. I think it's in either this article or one like it. Let's search Haeckel here. We mentioned that he's behind Hitler's master race idea. There's the image. Here you have a tree, chimpanzee, number 1 there. Number 3 there, gorilla. Number 4, the orang or orangutan. Look at number 2 rather. Look at number 4, Negro. That is evolution, and that is Hitler's inspiration. Tell me not to use Hitler as an illustration of evolution. He was evolutionist to the core and followed right on the heels of Haeckel. Notice Haeckel wrote, African man-like apes, black in color, and like their countrymen the Negroes, have the head long from back to front. The Asiatic man-like apes are, on the contrary, mostly brown or yellowish-brown color and have the head short from the front to back like their countrymen, the Malays and the Mongols. So Malaysians and Mongols. That's terrible. That is absolutely terrible. Which, by the way, what's he saying there? He's saying you have a different line of evolution for Asians than for Africans. Although I've never heard that built upon. Look, here, this article actually goes into Mein Kampf. Haeckel himself was an unabashed racist. He urged the German people to seek racial purity by purging the unfit among them, which sounds like who? Hitler. And to increase the superiority of the Nordic race by violent competition, that is war with other nations. What was Hitler doing? He's just being an evolutionist. A few decades later, these ideas found fertile soil in Adolf Hitler's mind and were openly expressed in his book Mein Kampf, or in English, My Struggle, taken from Haeckel's translation of Darwin's phrase, the struggle for existence, survival of the fittest. All right, that's the background for where we are today in the battle of creation or evolution. Christian evidences. All right, let's go back to the book here. If I can quit doing that. Okay, let's turn our attention to the flood. We are on Overview of Christian Evidences, number 2. Overview of Christian Evidences, number 2. We'll go back to the big screen so everybody can see the classroom for a few minutes. what we want to talk about with reference to the flood are a number of things. We want to talk about, first of all, the order of things as far as the Bible account of the flood is concerned. So that's what you see on the left-hand side of Christian Evidence's chart number 2. You have pre-flood, flood, post-flood. On the right side of that page, you'll see evidences for the reality of the flood and its universality. In other words, proof that the flood was not limited to, for instance, the Black Sea, which is one of the more recent ideas because some archaeologists, in fact, it wasn't an archaeologist, it was, who was the fellow associated with the Titanic? David Cameron? No, yeah, is that it? James Cameron. James Cameron found signs of civilization underneath the Black Sea, at the base of the Black Sea. And so therefore, that had to be what the flood account in Scripture was recounting. That's not true. It's not true. This was a universal flood. And we'll explain, we'll give some reasons why that's the case. We're going to notice then some of the traditions, the flood traditions that we see in the world around us. Some of you have been in these classes long enough to remember a statement that I have that if you have a counterfeit, that counterfeit is proves the existence of an original, and really proves the existence of a valued original. So if you have counterfeit traditions, flood traditions, those will prove that somewhere back there was a flood. The whole world has flood traditions. The whole world has creation traditions. We'll mention those briefly. But all cultures. The other day I've been trying to catch up on all my Star Treks. I haven't watched Star Treks in a while, so I've been watching the motion pictures again, and as I've had some free time. And as I was watching Star Trek 5, I had forgotten, but was interested to hear that they conceded on Star Trek 5 that all civilizations have this collective memory of creation and have a collective idea of heaven. And so, that's important, because what does that point back to? It points back to an authentic creation, an authentic presentation of an idea of heaven. Counterfeits imply the existence of originals. And the original is going to have the greater authenticity. We'll see why that's important when we talk about those. Then we're going to talk about a word study, or give a word study of flood terminology. That will be on page 2 of this chart, left-hand side. So those are the things that we want to focus upon with reference to the flood. Let's start back on the first page of that chart, pre-flood. Flood facts and timeline, pre-flood. Top left side of page 1. Mankind was condemned due to sin. Mankind was condemned due to sin. Let me switch the folks that are at home back on here. Mankind was condemned due to sin. Genesis 6, 5 through 7, and 11 through 13. Remember that, because that's going to be one of the things that's more authentic than the imitations, than the counterfeits. One man, Noah, was allowed to build an ark in which a remnant of men and animals would ultimately be saved in preparation for the coming flood. All right, tell me about this ark. Well, the ark, according to Genesis 6:14, was made of gopher wood. What was gopher wood? Well, we don't know what type of wood it was. All we know is that Scripture calls it gopher wood. This does not mean it was made of gophers. And it could be that it's because God told Noah, go for wood. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Brother Brother Douglas, there's number one for the day. I still owe you another pun before the day's over. Brother Douglas sent me an email earlier. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Actually, sent me 2 emails. One of them in particular was really good. Let's see here. You can see how far behind my email receiving is. This is the one that I really liked. What's the difference between a cat and a comma? One has claws at the end of its paws, and one is a pause at the end of a clause. So that's pretty good. There was between a cat and a comma. The other one was good as well, but not as good as the cat. This job isn't for everyone, but hey, it's in my genes. It's good too. All right, back to the subject at hand. Y'all wouldn't believe that sometimes I get off track. All right, so God told Noah, go for wood, was what he needed to build the ark. Genesis 6:14. The size of the ark, 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. Okay, we're going to talk about that more on the other side over here. Size of the ark, 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet. It's 300 cubits, 50 cubits, 30 cubits. All right, so we'll talk more about that over there. There was one window and one door in the ark. Genesis 6:16. And you'll remember that God was the one who shut and sealed the door. All right. Noah was allowed to build an ark in which a remnant of men in preparation for the coming flood. Genesis 6:8, 14 through 21. Genesis 7:2 through 4, and 6 through 10. In preparation for that, what did he have to put in the ark? Those animals. Remember that he put 2 each of unclean animals, 7 each of clean, but 7 each male and female of clean. So you have 14 of each of the clean. The idea of the language in chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, and chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. You wouldn't have 4 males and 3 females. You'd have 7 males, 7 females. All right. So you have obviously representatives of all different types of animals. Remember, we go back in mind to the discussions we had about the fixity of the species. If there's fixity of the species, there would have to be room for hundreds of thousands, millions on the ark. There was room on the ark for not hundreds of thousands or millions. That level of creation and the level of kinds taken on the ark must have been higher. Noah obeyed and was ultimately saved. Why? Hebrews tells us because his faith had motivated his obedience, and these had paved the way for God to shed his grace. Hebrews 11 is called the Great Faith chapter, or Faith's Hall of Fame. You know what we could also call Hebrews 11? The Great Obedience chapter. Grace's Hall of Fame. Because throughout that chapter, we see all 3 of those elements. By faith. Faith isn't a verb in that chapter. Faith is the object of a preposition that's demonstrating how. By faith, so-and-so performed this action, obeyed. And, having obeyed, received whatever reward was offered in each particular instance. So, in Noah's case, Hebrews 11:7, he was ultimately saved because his faith had motivated obedience. And these paved the way for God to shed his grace. The flood began with the fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven opening up. References to geological events, likely including geysers, volcanoes, etc., and to the condensing and falling of the firmament vapor which surrounded the earth. Remember in Genesis 1:7 that you had the earth, and then you had the waters that were above the earth. Okay, these waters that were above the earth, when, for instance, the volcanoes went off, they shot what we would call nuclei of condensation. Into the atmosphere. These nuclei would be that to which the water vapor would attach and then fall as water droplets. You have every one of these volcanoes opening up. You're going to be able to produce a lot of nuclei of condensation. One of the products of volcanoes, obviously you have ash, but you also have NaCl, sodium chloride, salt. Salt shoots up in the atmosphere. The water vapor that's contained in the canopy attaches to it and falls as rain. Okay, there's the source of the water. All right. So, likely, the fountains of the great deep, windows of heaven opening up are references to geological events. Rain fell for 40 days and nights, Genesis 7, 11, and 12, and 17. The waters covered even the tallest of earth's mountains. Here's a question. How tall were earth's mountains? Well, today we have Mount Everest. Yeah, could not think of it. Mount Everest. 29,000.
Yeah.
Okay, 29,000, something like 920. I don't remember for sure. Don't quote me on that. Do you have mountains that are 30,000 feet high before the flood? Well, that's a great question. If you have a mountain that's 29,000 feet high before the flood, how high is the water going to have to be to cover that mountain? 29,942 and a half feet. A lot of people will dispute the flood by saying, okay, where did all that water go? If Mount Everest was hanging out at 29,000 feet, and Wade made a comment, we'll comment on that in a minute. If Mount Everest was already at 29,920 feet, that's a good argument. Where did all that water go? But I would contend that Mount Everest wasn't at 29,920 feet, or whatever the exact height is. I would ask this type of question. What type of rock is Mount Everest? You start studying Mount Everest, you find out that Mount Everest is sedimentary rock. You have three types of rock. You have igneous, which is like volcanic rock. You have metamorphic, which is where lava magma, not lava. Lava is when it hits the surface, where you have magma heating another type of rock and changing its structure. And then you have sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is rock which is deposited. Okay, and obviously it would be from the ground up. What's the cause of deposition? Well, the water cycle. You have rain. That rain washes sediment off mountains and such. And that sediment is laid down. What did you not have, apparently, before the flood? Well, rain. Fountains, water came forth from the earth. So the water cycle, the way we know it, hasn't started before the flood. Which means, at most, you're going to have minor sedimentation from the rivers that flowed into the land, not from the land to the sea. If Mount Everest is sedimentary rock, it wasn't standing before the flood. Okay? So, how high were the highest mountains before the flood? Well, we can't answer that question. But they wouldn't have been 29,000 feet high. What's reasonable? Well, 1,000, 2,000. Don't know. Don't know a particular height that would be overly reasonable. But do remember that Scripture says that the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, which means the world today doesn't look anything like the world then. Now, Wade Purdom said, don't know for sure. Some of the highest today could have been pushed up by post-flood forces. Exactly right. What's happening after the flood? All of those processes, those geologic processes that went crazy to cause the flood, have to go from this extreme activity to what we see today of occasional and rare activity. If you were to picture a ball, we have a couple of tables here in the classroom in the front row. If you were to picture a ball being put at one side of this first table, and folk at home are seeing this from that camera right now. If I had a ball here and I pushed that ball would start rolling there, and depending on how hard I pushed it, if I were real good, I could get it to stop somewhere over here. What could you tell me about the speed of that ball from the moment I pushed it to the moment it stopped? What's that ball going to be doing?
Slowing down.
That ball is going to be slowing down. Okay? You have the push of that ball that kicks off the geological processes leading to the flood. And what we've seen since then has been that ball slowing down. Okay? Now, uniformitarianism says the present is the key to the past. It's going slow right now. It always has gone slow. But pushing a ball shows us how thermodynamics works and how gravity works and so forth. You're going to have a slowing down. All right. Moreover, you have those initial processes, but not only that, you have this flood that has to go back somewhere. Can't go back to the firmament. It's going to go to the sea. How's it going to go to the sea? It's going to have to run off over time, over land. You look at at what's called the alluvial plain or delta of the Mississippi River. Now, I'm obviously exaggerating the height, but you have the Mississippi River here. You have a wide delta. The river's here. You have a wide delta where the water has run off. Okay, going down toward the Gulf post-flood. You have the Grand Canyon. That Grand Canyon is obviously carved into the rock. You have that little Colorado River. They say, well, that little Colorado River did this over millions of years. But what if way upstream here there was an amount of water that was released, and that water flowed with force through this region? It's going to carve and tear up that sediment that had been left during the flood in short order. It's not going to take millions of years. Yes, sir?
I mean, you can see that. I mean, if you look at satellite photos of the Grand Canyon, you can tell which direction that the disaster came from. I mean, it doesn't take to think that the river itself did that. You can see it. It looks like I mean,
Not sufficient.
I mean, to me, you can show that in a debate. I mean, and just say, hey, does this look like this just washed out, or does it look like a disaster came from the north or the south? And have everybody in the audience, kind of raise their hand. Which way did the disaster come from?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so obvious.
Yeah, and the fact that and we'll talk about Mount St. Helens, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about the Grand Canyon. But the very fact that this can happen in a matter of a couple of years in the Mount St. Helens, the little Grand Canyon there, 10th scale, it can happen in the Grand Canyon by that figure, in 20 years. But in reality, it could be even quicker because you've got a greater volume of water.
And it just happens to be a large lake bed near there.
Yeah. Let's see, are there examples of virgin rock that doesn't appear to be volcanic or sedimentary rock that is differed from that formed by catastrophic forces? That's a question that Wade Purdom has asked. Are there examples of quote-unquote virgin rock, pre-flood rock, if you will, that doesn't appear to be volcanic or sedimentary rock that is different from that formed by catastrophic forces? It's a great question. You would have to have a bedrock that is not sedimentary at the very least. It could be a rock that's igneous, if I remember correctly, a dolomite or basalt. No, don't remember about basalt. Anyway, you could have an igneous rock. Now, I don't know, if we have locations where that rock is seen. What I would say is this: you ask the average person, that believes in Scripture, where was the Garden of Eden? What are they going to say? Middle East. Garden of Eden was in the Middle East. They're probably going to put it somewhere near where Ur the Chaldees was, somewhere near the head of the Persian Gulf. So Tigris and Euphrates, is that where the Garden of Eden was? The answer to that question is no. Someone will say, well, what about the Tigris and Euphrates? They're specifically mentioned in Genesis. Yeah, what do we have here in the States? We have some different cities called Athens. We have some different cities called Paris. We are just outside of a city called Memphis. Where did those names come from? Europe, Africa. Okay, you can reuse names. The names get reused. Somebody before the flood, Noah, has been familiar with the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, wherever they were. After the flood, hey, here's some rivers. Those are like the Tigris and Euphrates back before the flood. Let's name them. Let's name them Tigris and Euphrates. That's not unheard of. We do the same thing today. New York, okay? New England. So that's not really that strong an argument. What's the argument? What type of ground is under the Middle East? Sedimentary. There wouldn't have been sedimentary rock under the Garden of Eden. There wouldn't have been. Certainly wouldn't have been limestone under the Garden of Eden, because limestone is made from basically the shells of little creatures, calciferous limestone. You pour I can't think of it, hydrochloric acid on a piece of limestone, it's going to bubble, it's going to fizz because it had life. and now it's the shells of those organisms. You couldn't have something like that under the Garden of Eden because that's where the first life was. Where was the Garden of Eden? Could have been underneath where we're standing. We don't know. But the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Completely different. So a good question. Doug Hoff asked about plate tectonics. Great question. We talked about that ball rolling. I've heard a lot of people argue against plate tectonics, continental drift. And you know, I can understand the concern. You know, if I give somebody that believes in that an inch, they can take the mile. Okay, you've allowed this to happen. You know, that you've said, okay, Africa looks like it could fit in between, for instance, the North America and South America, or Europe. But that takes millions of years. Well, let's think about that ball again. The fact that we still see the ball rolling. The continents are moving, definitely moving, no question at all. They're moving about the distance of a fingernail, about the speed a fingernail grows, rather. About the speed that a fingernail grows, your continents move each year. The evolutionists will say, okay, take that back at that rate, uniformitarianism. The creationists, who have an appreciation for flood geology, can say they're moving at that rate now. That ball has been slowing down. Those things could have moved at a very great rate during that flood. One of the arguments for uniformitarianism with regard to plate tectonics and continental drift is the same types of fossils being found in South America that are found in South Africa. Did those dead animals swim across after the flood? Well, what about that land was in the same location when the flood took place, when those geologic processes started? And those animals died within miles or tens of miles of each other. Flood takes place, and those geological changes are occurring. They're spreading.
Mountains rose and the valley sank.
Mountains rose, valleys sank. And how did animals get to Australia? Land bridge close after the flood. The animals leave the ark. They go their different directions. What's happened? That ball was pushed, and right here they're getting off the ark. Over time, that ball has been slowing down, but it's been slowing down relatively steadily, and you have the animals now being landlocked, so to speak, in their various locations. So, yeah, I don't doubt that continental drift happened. The question is the time scale, and the question is, you know, what was there something that pushed, or is it something that happens the uniformitarian way over millions and billions of years? So, plate tectonics, I mean, you can look at science, you can see that's happening. You know, the mid-ocean ridge, you know, there's ample evidence that those plates are moving. That's why we have earthquakes in California. San Andreas Fault. I'm thinking San Mateo, but that's the place. San Andreas Fault. You have the Juan de Fuca plate up farther north. That's moving. I mean, you can tell there's movement taking place. Look at the mountains or the islands of Hawaii. Tell me about the islands of Hawaii. The Big Island. Have you noticed that those islands get smaller? Why do they get smaller? Well, that land or that plate that those are on. That's a hot spot. That plate's moving that way. If this island's bigger, then it spent more time over that hot spot then than it did here. And even less time here, and even less time here. Or vice versa, I may have my arrows the wrong direction. But you have a movement that's not been at a uniform rate. Otherwise, all the islands would be roughly the same size. But you have a big island. You're not moving at the same rate. Anyway, so this spreading happens. Okay, let's go back to, it's another break time. What do y'all say we take about 15 more minutes instead of taking a break and then going 15 minutes or so, and we'll call it a night in about 15 more minutes. Let's just continue here. Let's see, water's covered even the tallest of Earth's mountains. Genesis 7:18 through 20 tells us that the waters covered the mountains by 15 feet. 15 cubits, rather. 15 cubits, which would be 22.5 feet. Which those people that know about the draft of ships will say that a boat the size of the ark would have a draft that would be about 22.5 feet. Remember, the ark was 30 cubits tall, 45 feet tall, 22.5 feet or so. What this means was the ark was specifically designed by God to just clear the highest mountains. That's impressive. After 150 more days of the water remaining at its height, Genesis 7:24, the waters began to subside. Genesis 8:1 through 3, and the ark came to rest, quote unquote, upon the mountains of Ararat. Not on Mount Ararat per se, but on the mountains of Ararat. Some of you may have heard the name of a scientist, geologist, whatever you might want to say, named Ron Wyatt. He's passed away now, but Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt claimed to have found Noah's Ark. He's also the one that says that when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, they didn't cross the Gulf of Aqaba. They crossed the Gulf of Suez. They crossed the Gulf of Aqaba. Well, I disagree with that. And he said that he found Noah's Ark. Well, his Noah's Ark was shaped a lot like a boat and didn't really fit Scripture's description. Well, Ron Wyatt's pretty well been shown to have been a glory hog, not a great scientist or archaeologist. It was on the mountains of Ararat, not necessarily Mount Ararat. Noah and the others waited until the earth was dry, Genesis 8:5-14, before disembarking at God's command. God told him when they could leave the ark. Post-flood, with feet on dry land, Noah built an altar, offered sacrifices to God. A little side note right up here, and this is going to be important in a minute. So let me go back and mention. Actually, it'll be important next week when we get to the bottom right-hand side of the page. But he waited until the earth was dry. Remember that was a period of 2.5 months that he was waiting. During that time, he sent out a raven. Okay, that raven did not return. He sent a dove out. And that dove, trying to read my writing here, was gone, 7 days, brought back an olive leaf. And then the dove was sent out again. And 7 days later, that's right, it was sent, the dove was sent out 7 days after the raven, I guess. Again, hard to read my writing, and I don't have it memorized. Anyway, the dove returned with the olive leaf then the dove didn't come back. Well, the raven would have been feeding on carrion that still would have been floating around after the flood. The dove brought back an olive leaf, which means it found vegetation of some kind, and then it didn't return, which means it found a place to stay. Now, why is that important? That's going to be important because over here, when we learn about we learn about the Gilgamesh epic, one of the things that the Gilgamesh epic specifies is that birds were sent out. What an amazing parallel. Not overly amazing because they were accounts of the same event, but definitely showing the precise nature of these things. In other words, they're the same event. All right, post-flood, with feet on dry land, Noah built an altar, offered sacrifices to God, was blessed by God with a covenant sealed by the rainbow. And what was that covenant? That covenant was that God would not destroy the earth by water again. Genesis 9:12 through 17. Okay, let's, for the rest of the time this evening, let's turn our attention to, I've been making y'all watch me when I've been writing on the chart. Oh, well, at least hopefully you have the chart in front of you. I'll switch back to the chart now, though. I apologize to you folk at home. If I ever do that, y'all just send a note to me saying, hey, we can't see what's going on. All right, let's go to the top right side of the page. Purpose of the flood. Evidences for the reality of the flood and its universality. Number one, first evidence. The purpose of the flood was to destroy life from the face of the earth. If this only happened in a limited geographic region, do you think that would have sufficed to destroy life on all the earth? No, certainly not. So this was not a limited flood because it had to destroy all life. It had to be universal. Genesis 6:13 through 17. And you'll notice one of the other reasons here as you get down further, that was not only the purpose, that was the effect. All life was destroyed. Okay, that is, that wasn't on board the ark. The period of warning. I don't know if any of the folk here or watching have been in floods or not. Back in 1972, we actually lost a car in a flood in Vicksburg, Mississippi. That's the earliest memory that I have is in that flood, being in a boat and Dad and other men pushing that boat probably waist deep through this flood to get us to safety. How long does it take to warn somebody if you know a flood's coming? A day? 2 days? You can't give much more warning than that. The folk in New Orleans had warning. You know that they had some warning. Some fled, others didn't. Some didn't take advantage of the warning. Folk in Indonesia, they didn't have that warning. Japan didn't have the warning. Good lesson there. The difference between the loss of a lot of life and the loss of a little life is the warning. We need to be warning people, obviously, about sin and its catastrophic spiritual effects. If we fail to warn, a lot more people are going to lose their souls. If we will warn, maybe that will save something. But anyway, the difference is the warning. A little side note, and for those that are here and those that are watching that preach, something to think about. Period of warning. Either way, you're not going to spend 120 years warning somebody about this. If that had been the purpose of the 120 years yet for a man's days, Genesis 6:3, to warn, would that not necessarily have meant this would be something greater than a local flood? Local flood, you can come through 3 days earlier. Hey, the dam's going to break. Better go to the hills. You don't need 120 years to be warned about that. What's Noah doing? Evidently, he's warning for 120 years. The need for an ark. If it's local, just walk. You don't have to build a huge ark to avoid a local flood. Just move. You got 120 years to do it. You can just walk. You can carry all the animals you want with you. You could probably make a bunch of trips. But he needed an ark. Why? Because he's not going to be able to flee it. You can't just run to the mountains. You're going to have to be in it and above it. The size of that ark. We mentioned the size a moment ago. Genesis 6:15, the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. A cubit was in the Hebrew cubit. Different cultures had different cubits. But the Hebrew cubit, remember that Moses is writing in Hebrew, so it would have been a Paleo-Hebrew. He's writing in this language. Moses would have been talking about a cubit that was 1.5 feet long and 18 inches long. Roughly the distance from the tip of the forefinger to the elbow. Now, how do we know that? How do we know that's a cubit? We know that because of Hezekiah's conduit in Jerusalem. Hezekiah's conduit was a tunnel from the spring Gihon outside of the southeast wall of Jerusalem to the pool of Siloam inside the city wall. That tunnel is 1,800 feet long. Inside the tunnel was an inscription that said that it was 1,200 cubits. 1,200 cubits equals 1,800 feet. 1 cubit equals 1.5 feet. So that's how we know the size of the cubit. This means that the ark was 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet. Rivaled only by ships built after the Industrial Revolution. Far exceeding any used on lakes or seas earlier than the Industrial Revolution. Massive, massive ships. Or a massive, massive ship. 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet. That's a football field and a half long. Okay, the duration of the flood demonstrates the universality of the ark. Well, remember the size of the ark. Why is it so large? Because it's got to carry all those animals. The duration of the flood, 1 year and 10 days is how long this lasted. Far exceeds the length of a localized flood. How long does a localized flood last? Localized flood
Maybe last a week.
lasts a week, a couple of weeks. I remember when I was in school preaching, you had that big flood in Missouri. That was maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Mississippi River flooded, a lot of damage there, St. Louis and right across the river in Illinois. Think about the tsunami and the flood associated with it. Think about the earthquake and the tsunami or flood associated with it in Japan not long ago. Those things didn't last weeks. But a year and 10 days, that's not local. The depth of the waters, 22.5 feet above the highest mountain. That says this was a universal flood because you cannot stack water. It's not possible. You can't stack water. And the effect of the flood, as we mentioned earlier, could only have been accomplished by a universal flood. God's promise to never again destroy the earth in that way shows that it had achieved that effect. If this were a local flood, you know what happens every time a local flood happens? God lied. Because he said he'd never do that again. This is a local flood. He's done it again. Not local. Other biblical references to Noah and the flood speak of Noah and the flood as reality. Psalm 104, 5-9, Ezekiel 14, 14 and 20 speaks of Noah as a real person. in the same sense as Daniel and Job. Matthew 24:37-39, in the days of Noah, talk about the warning there. Luke 17:27, Hebrews 11:7, 1 Peter 3:20 and 21, 2 Peter 2:5, 2 Peter 3:6. By the way, in the New Testament, as we'll see in a couple of weeks, the idea there is it's catastrophic. Catastrophic. The preponderance of flood traditions, we'll have to talk about that in 2 weeks. Those are on the page a little bit further down. The fact that you have flood traditions in all of these different cultures throughout history. The fact that civilization spread from Mesopotamia indicates that that's where life ended up after the flood. The geological evidence of catastrophe, that is, fossils found around the world, and polystrate fossils, misplaced strata, strata that's flipped over, things of that nature. Fossils that aren't in the right spot, where the geologists would want them, the evolutionary geologists. And the reasonable limits of scientific dating methods. The reasonable limit of scientific dating methods. What is, by the way, a little bit farther up, spread of civilization there. Mesopotamia is called, quote unquote, the cradle of civilization, you might remember. Reasonable limits of dating methods. What are the reasonable limits of dating methods? Well, let's talk about, for just a moment, radiocarbon dating. The evolutionists would try to make you think that radiocarbon dating can be used for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. Really, the top date provided by Pfeiffer in the Wycliffe Dictionary of Archaeology is 20,000 years plus or minus 5 to 10%, which means 22,000 to 18,000 is the extreme limit of radiocarbon dating. Now that's the extreme limit if radiocarbon has been at a certain level for the last 18 to 22,000 years, hasn't varied, and if it is released by organisms at the same steady rate that it's been released at for 18 to 22,000. So that's 20,000 plus or minus 5 to 10% under conditions that do not allow for a variation in the radiocarbon amount in the atmosphere or the organisms. In his book Archaeology, Thomas says you can radiocarbon date to 6,200 years BC. So roughly 8,200 years ago. That's Thomas in archaeology. But what's even more telling is in McCrae's book, John McCrae's book, Archaeology in the New Testament, quote unquote, radiocarbon atoms may not have existed in the Earth's atmosphere before 2000 BC. So you may not even have had radiocarbon atoms before 4,000 years ago. That's a dating method which, when genuinely applied, does not support an old Earth. Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, doesn't support an old Earth. Dendrochronology goes back about 8,000 years, if I remember correctly. Dendrochronology. So, reasonable limits of genuine dating methods. Now, I want to add just a couple of details a little bit further up with regard to the size of the ark. Let me just give you a couple of more specific things, and I hate to go back, but I forgot to put this on before. At this size, 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet, you had 1,396,000 cubic feet of space. 1,396,000 cubic feet of space. That's the same size as 522 railroad boxcars. Now, obviously, you're not going to fit 1 million animals in there, but you can fit enough to have all the kinds in the earth in there. All right, those are just a couple more details on the size of the yard. Good to see everybody, and good to hear from everybody that's at home. We're certainly glad that y'all are able to be with us. Again, for those of you that may have missed it, I am not going to be able to be here next Thursday. We are going to have videos, a couple of videos on Charles Darwin. One of them presented by Brad Harrod, and then one that's presented by another source, not a member of the church, but I think it will be beneficial for us to get an idea of what Darwin believed and you know, his contribution and whatnot to his quote unquote theory.
Do you mind if I get the names of those?
I don't remember them right off the top of my head. In the Shadow of Darwin, no, Darwin's Footsteps or something like that is Brad Harris. I just don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We can find out. We can find out next week.
Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate Steve's willingness to do that for us next week. All right, good to see everybody. I hope everybody has a safe couple of weeks until I'm able to be with y'all again. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Because when you talk about the, you know how the animals get like to Australia.
Yes, sir.
So at some point, are you saying that all the continents were together?
At some point, they had to be together.
Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have animals in Australia. At least Australia had to be together.
Yeah. Isn't it somewhere in Genesis? Because I think I read something about when some separated or something. Is that what it's talking about?
Yeah, with the mountains and valleys. Yeah, that's what's taking place. Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah, that's that ball being pushed, and right after the flood, close, that ball's still rolling though, and they're going apart and slowing down as they get farther apart.
So the animals couldn't.
The animals had to go post haste. They had to move pretty quickly, but they were able to get across.
Got across.
Yes, sir.
Really, even down to Australia, I mean, there's strings of islands all the way down there.
That's true. Yeah, you can follow New Guinea and some of those, the Malaysia and Indonesia.
You have to wonder if they all separated like they are now, because you have to wonder, man, how did the animals get to Australia? You know, and then you have some like marsupials, like the opossum. I mean, he's here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you got marsupials in Australia,
And they got
the opossum had to swim a long ways, didn't he?
Renowned swimmers.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all. Appreciate y'all coming out.
Oh,
And then
Next
you
week,
had
that you have a good chart on the kings of Assyria.
Yes,
So
sir.
those ancient kings and chronologies, is
Yeah.
that the charts that you set?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'd like to have one, and some of the other guys from Brother Mosher's class may like to have one. I don't know if Jimmy might, Roger
Yeah.
might. And I don't know how many we have online during Brother Mosher's class, but what are they, $5 a piece?
Three. Yes, sir.
I was thinking about that.
Let me give you my money for mine now.
Some arguments about the second law of common dynamics. I mean, it's arguments I guess evolution,
Now I can do it from me, maybe.
Well, I can run back there in just a second if.
Okay, all right.
I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. If you take the earth as being the system, then there is an outside force. But even at that, I mean,
That's
evolution,
right, but-
evolution runs contrary to the idea that
Thank you.
things become more and more orderly.
Yeah,
or
move from order to disorder, yeah?
Yeah, so even without taking the universe as a whole, you even,
That's right, well, I mean,
just taking the world.
everything, even if everything we have is a closed system, it's running down.
Oh, yeah, the whole universe as a whole is running down. I mean,
It's for Roger, too.
Okay. Yes, sir.
yeah, so I mean, that to me, I guess that's what they're arguing about is the world as a system versus the universe as a system. Just me, the universe as a system, that's slam dunk. I mean, I'm just like, it's like that, law of biogenesis. I mean, that,
You can't argue.
I mean, law of biogenesis and second law of thermodynamics, those are just slam dunks. I mean, how can you argue with it? That Worley was smart dude, he says universes create themselves all the time. It's like Stephen
Amazing.
Hawking. Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be right back with three of those charts, and I'll tell you something else as well.
While you coming back, I'm gonna use bathroom here.
There you go. All right, appreciate it. I'll show y'all what else I have here if y'all are interested, not necessarily right now, but sometime. Those are just the dates,
Okay.
but that's virtually every ruler, at least of any significance in Scripture. But these charts
Mhm.
break those guys down and give more details where appropriate, and give the backgrounds and some of the other things regarding those different nations. And we have those for most of the nations in Scripture, all the big ones, of course. But anyway, if y'all are interested in those along the way,
These
y'all
are,
let me know.
this one covers all the nations?
The first chart is Israel and her neighbors.
Okay.
The second chart is Egypt. The third chart, Assyria, Babylon, Syria. Fourth chart, Media, Persia, Phoenicia, Carthage. The fifth chart, Greece, Macedonia, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The sixth chart, maybe sixth chart is Ptolemies and Seleucids, and the seventh chart is Rome, and then this is basically the eighth chart.
Okay.
But anyway, y'all hold on to those, and y'all look at them, and in a couple of weeks, y'all let me know if y'all are interested in those. But y'all can pass them around next Thursday.
Okay, and let everybody
And
see them.
if anybody's interested in them,
Thank you.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. But that's just more detail than you get on the other charts.
put this in my folder, it will not get bent or anything at all, so.
All right, have a good one.
All right, we'll see
Drive
you.
safe, drive safe.
All right.
Dan, I have to throw that coffee maker, back into the break room right quick before I leave, so.
Okay.
Did you want a cup of coffee before you leave?
Oh, no, thank you. Never acquired the taste.
I have a hard time acquiring the taste of the break room coffee here.
Yes, sir.
Let me take care of that before I forget. Okay. I guess. Move it off. Off. Okay. Carry this to the break room, so. Have you ever tried some of the stuff?
What's that?
The tea that you make in this?
Oh, yeah, I love that tea. I've got one of those in my office. Yes, sir. I was wondering whose maker that was. I haven't had their chai tea, though. I love my
He said he won't continue to share, that would be too expensive, but he said to tell everybody to have at it tonight.
Okay, well, I'll grab one of those and I'll repay him. I'll put that on my desk so
I'm
that
gonna
I
put this
see.
back in there and,
You ever had rooibos?
I'm sorry?
You ever had rooibos? That's red bush. It's from South Africa.
Mm.
Boy, it's good.
I've been drinking some Earl Grey.
Yeah, I like Earl Grey.
I like the Kenya AA coffee.
I haven't had that.
Some of the Origin coffee. We got a new coffee shop in Martin.
Ah.
I go down there and try some of the wild stuff sometimes.
Yeah. Good.
Not Roger, but Ken forgot that paper. Is anybody gonna be in here this week, or will it be okay?
No,
If not, I'm running. I would, if I,
It won't be,